I am fascinated with the tools doctors use to figure out why we are sick. When we go to the doctor's office with a sore throat, the doctor might take a throat swab, run a test, and find out we have strep throat and need antibiotics. Or we might come in complaining that we're constantly tired and thirsty. The doctor might draw our blood, run a test, and determine our blood sugar is very high, and prescribe us insulin to help regulate it. When we are sick, our bodies almost always display symptoms that can tell a doctor why, but our doctors need objective tests that can help them interpret those symptoms. In the case of strep throat and diabetes, the tests are straightforward. There's either bacteria in our throat, or there's not. Our blood sugar is either high, or it's not. But what about conditions such as head injuries that don't have an objective test? What happens then? Well, if you get tackled too hard on the football field, or in my case, get hit in the face with a softball because you weren't paying attention during warm-up, you might have suffered a concussion. But there isn't an objective test for brain injuries. A doctor can't swab your throat or draw your blood. Instead, a doctor makes a judgment call based on the symptoms they can see, either by just looking at you and asking questions, or by taking a CAT scan of your brain. This is an informed judgment call, but a judgment call nonetheless. It's a high-stakes call too. If the doctor gets it wrong, you could go back out onto the field with a concussion, putting yourself at risk of second impact syndrome. Basically, if you get hit in the head again before your first concussion heals, you could end up with permanent brain damage, in a wheelchair, or dead. While there isn't an objective test for brain injury yet, there's about to be. The FDA, the government agency that regulates the medical products that are available to doctors and patients, recently approved a blood test that can help doctors diagnose concussions. There's just one problem. It takes 2 to 3 hours to run the test. If a doctor is on the sidelines trying to figure out if a player can go back out on the field, the test needs to take minutes, not hours. That's where my research comes in. I'm designing a device using lab-on-a-chip technology to speed up the brain injury test. Well, not that. Something more like this. Lab-on-a-chip technology allows tests to be scaled down so that they can be run quickly. My lab-on-a-chip device consists of 3 parts: the test itself, the chip to run the test, and the electronics to analyze the test and display the results. The blood test is designed to measure a protein that is released when brain cells are injured. A small amount of the protein ends up in the blood, so the test has to be able to distinguish the protein we are interested in from all of the other components in blood. To measure only the protein, we use molecules called antibodies. These molecules have 2 arms that are able to catch one thing and one thing only. Just like a softball player is, or at least should be, focused on catching the softball, the antibody is only focused on catching our protein. The antibodies allow us to catch the brain injury protein in the blood sample and ignore everything else. Those antibodies are attached to a tiny bead that's only 3 micrometers in diameter. Just to put that into perspective, 5 of these beads lined up next to each other are about the size of a human hair. When we mix the antibody-coated beads with blood from a patient with a suspected brain injury, the antibodies do what they do best and catch the protein we are interested in. But we need a way to see the protein that the antibodies caught. To see the protein, we use another antibody that is labeled with a dye that lights up. Now we've constructed an antibody sandwich with the protein in the middle. To make the analysis quicker and easier, we want to measure the light from all of the sandwiches at the same time, which means we need to group the beads together. That's where the chip comes in. When the beads flow through the channel, they get trapped in a single line, allowing the light from all the sandwiches to be analyzed at once. The light coming from the dye on the sandwiches is like a dimmer switch. When the protein is present, the switch is on, and how much light there is depends on how much protein is present. If there is a high protein concentration, the dimmer switch is turned up. But if there is a low protein concentration, the dimmer switch is turned down. If there is no protein, then the switch is off. The chip can be inserted into a little case that has electronic components that measure the brightness of the light. A protein concentration is assigned based on the brightness, and that number is displayed to the doctor. Based on this number, a doctor can decide whether or not you have a concussion. The cool thing is that the doctor can use this test again and again to monitor your recovery and find the treatments that work best for you. This device is still in the early development stages, so it could be up to 10 years before it makes its way into a doctor's hands. But eventually, by providing doctors with a number, this device will take the judgment call out of the diagnosis of brain injury, making sure that you don't get chronic headaches or worse from playing your favorite sport.